Welcome back to STEM Explained. Today we're joined by Dr. Heather Mallory, a biologist, researcher, and educator whose career has taken her from studying insect behavior and neurobiology to mentoring the next generation of scientists. In this episode, we talk about finding our path in STEM, overcoming imposter syndrome, embracing curiosity, and why you don't need to have everything figured out to build a meaningful career in science. Let's get into it. I guess maybe to start off with, could you just maybe give a brief introduction about yourself and I guess your career and your interests and stuff?
Um, yeah, so let's see, it's a longer one at this point. So where do I start? I would say in high school, I always loved science and I actually liked biology. I actually liked chemistry more than biology. I didn't like that biology was inexact and I liked the exactness of chemistry. But I also loved being outside. And so when I went to college, I literally looked through the catalog and I saw that there were jobs that you could be outside and be a biologist. And I said, all right. And I don't know that I don't think I ever had a plan. I just kind of went with it and let things come to me and take those experiences when they arrived. I don't know that that's necessarily how you should do things. You probably should have a little more of a plan. And so, I finished my undergrad. I worked in labs. I enjoyed that environment. I did that for a couple of years. And then one of the people I would see a lot, he was like, "You really like the lab?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You should go get your PhD." And I was like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like people are very happy with their PhDs. I was at University of Arizona. It was an R1. There was all this pressure. Professors weren't in the lab or in the field. They were all in their offices. And I said, I don't want to do that. And then eventually I said, well, I don't know, maybe I'll do it. So then I did my graduate work and I always knew I didn't want to be at a big R1 institution. I enjoyed the teaching aspect of things and spent time teaching in liberal arts colleges, WNL, Hamilton College. Loved that work because I got to teach a lot, right? I was doing the research, but I could also really focus on my teaching. And so when I moved to North Carolina for personal reasons, I said, well, let's try this high school teaching thing because it was either that or industry. And industry looked really boring to me because you just, sit at a bench and do the same thing over and over again. And so, yeah, I think it just really just kind of fell into each piece. And every time I landed somewhere, I was like, okay, well, what can I do here? And how can I push myself? And what am I enjoying? What am I not enjoying? So not very thought out, not very planned. Now at this point, I'm actually maybe making some career plans, but that's new for me.
Wait, so you mentioned that you've done a lot of things. So how did you decide on your PhD topic? I think your PhD was just about brain plasticity and insect behavior. So how did you decide on that compared to I think initially we were talking about how you loved going outside and stuff. So how did that shift from there to your PhD research, I guess?
Yeah, it was all my experience I was having. So I was working as an undergrad. I worked in the behavioral ecology lab that was insects. And so some of that was field work. A lot of it was just watching spiders and fruit flies, like bigger fruit flies, walnut flies, have these really cool behaviors. And so I hadn't really thought about the behaviors of insects and understand all kinds of things from just observation was really interesting to me. But that was a challenging work environment. And so I chose to leave that work environment, even though because I worked there for a little bit after my undergraduate graduation. It was hard because I loved the science and I loved a lot of what was happening, but it wasn't a great place for me to work. And so I just looked for another job, and it ended up being a neurobiology lab, and it ended up being one of the most phenomenal mentorship experiences I had. It was run by women, smart, interesting, supportive, caring environment that pushed me, that let me try things. And so that was what actually gave me the confidence to say, like, okay, I can go get my PhD. And so much of that is, at least in it still is this way. It's like who you know and who's going to connect you to things. And so I reached out to the person that I had worked with in behavioral ecology. Even though we didn't have a great relationship, I knew he was connected and those sorts of things. And so he just recommended some people that I should talk to and try to go to these programs. And so it was really just about who I knew. And I think in some ways also like how I fell into things, I was staying in what I knew and what I was comfortable with, right? So I had done some neurobiology. I like that. I'd done some behavioral ecology. I like that. I was like, okay, let's just put these two things together. Again, I never thought more broadly or specifically about what might be interesting.
That kind of got me thinking. You were talking like how you like the neuroscience of the ecology aspect. How does that like relate to chemistry? Because I remember before you were talking about how you really liked chemistry because it was like so exact. And how did that interest kind of shift or I guess influence your research and like what you did later on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of it, honestly, was my undergraduate chemistry class. I didn't like it. Right. And, I went to a big university, a great University of Arizona. It's a great school. They're called weed out classes. I'm sitting in a lecture hall with 250 other people. And I was like, I don't find this as interesting as I did before. So I think I just kind of like left chemistry in the rearview mirror at that point. But I do keep returning to it a little bit, right? So biochemistry and in the neurobiology lab, we were studying neurotransmitters, and you can do things like calcium imaging to watch how neurons are firing. And so these things just kind of keep showing up. And I think I'm just a generally curious person. So if you put something in front of me, I'm going to be curious about it and I'm going to want to learn about it. So maybe people put a little more chemistry in front of me, I would have gone more in that pathway, but it just didn't like show up for me. Yeah.
So what is calcium imaging? You were talking about that. And there's a lot of like other like biology techniques that you see like, oh, in situ something or something something. And then everyone's like, oh, what does that mean? So like what are these like lab techniques even like meant to do or just like how or are they very like how do you like specify which which tool to use for what research and how do you like identify, I guess?
Yeah, great question. So, unfortunately, I think science has a lot of complicated terminology that can put people off. And it has to be a science, right? So we need to be specific about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And so once you're trained on that, you're like, oh, I know what that is. And it may not even be that. I mean, it is technically a little challenging, but like, for example, calcium imaging, you just have the growing cells in a little petri dish, and then you add a dye and you have a camera that's like taking pictures of it. And when that cell is, doing some sort of communication with other cells, calcium moves. So that's just a really fundamental thing of how cells work. Calcium is really important for the communication between cells. And this dye will just like glow brighter when calcium's moving. So a lot of these things, in situ hybridization, immunohistocytochemistry, right? They have these really long names, but the vast majority of them are just different techniques to visualize what's happening on a cellular level. And so some of those dyes glow, some of them don't glow. Sometimes you're going to have a live cell. Sometimes you're going to freeze that cell in time with chemicals. And so I think, if people feel intimidated, like don't be, just, I didn't know what any of those things were, especially when I started in my neurobiology lab. Like I hadn't even taken neuroscience. I actually didn't get that job because I didn't have the background in it, and they liked me, but they hired somebody else who had more background in it. That made sense. And then that person unfortunately had issues with their visa and couldn't work. And so they called me a couple of weeks later and said, are you still interested? I said, sure. I said, well, we kind of want you to take a neuroscience class while you're in our lab, just like audit it. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes total sense because I have no idea what I'm doing. So I think that's all to say, like, most people don't know what they're doing, and everybody at some point had no clue what they're doing, right? Like, and when I'm teaching here in this research program, students come to me with things, I'm like, I have no idea what that is, but let's learn about it together, right? Let's figure it out together. We'll mispronounce things because we're reading it instead of hearing it, and finally somebody corrects us. We're like, okay, yeah, we should make sure we say that correctly. So just like the terminology is purposeful and important, and also shouldn't be intimidating, because you walk around anywhere and you're going to see people using all these terms you don't know. I don't know anything about what's going on in like physics terms and, more advanced chemistry. And I'm not afraid to ask. I'm not afraid to look stupid. I'm not afraid to say I don't know. And so just lean into that, because a lot of people don't know. And some people are just pretending they know and they don't know. So just be like, hey, I don't know what this is. Explain it to me, and to not let those things intimidate somebody away from something they're interested in.
I kind of had a follow-up question, kind of like on the, like everyone's kind of like has no idea what they're doing. And like personally for me, I always get scared, like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like so behind. So like how did you like I don't know if you had that fear or if you like had like at least some like nervousness, I guess. So how did you like I guess mitigate that, but also how you as like a teacher helped other students kind of like tackle that fear or nervousness?
I mean, imposter syndrome is very real, and I still have times that I feel it, right? Even though I'm at a point in my career that, I should have enough confidence and reassurance that doesn't happen. But that's just a human thing, right? I think what a lot of it is just being in that discomfort a little bit, having a strong network of people that support you and love you. And, when you're feeling down or overwhelmed, they're going to be there for you. I think so much of it really comes down to, I had a fundamental shift, and this is going to go all the way back to middle school, where I got bullied a lot. So I got bullied a lot in middle school. And I had this awakening one day. I don't know if that might be an overstatement. I had these really kind of ugly, fugly shoes that I just loved. I love these shoes. And I had this bully that would make fun of me for wearing these shoes. And I had this moment where I was like, why do I care what this person thinks? I don't care what this person thinks, right? This person's mean. They're not my friend. Why am I giving their opinion any kind of value? And I think I just I've taken that through my life, and I've just decided that I don't actually, I value the opinions of those people I love and respect, and that love and respect me. And outside of that, I'm not afraid to, look silly or, do things that are out of the ordinary, because the people who love me and care about me are there for me. And the people who are going to judge me and who are going to try to bring me down, they're not the people's opinions that I value, right? So why am I going to give them my energy, and why am I going to give them my power or power over me at all? And so I try to model that for students a lot of times. That I'm human. I make mistakes all the time. Spelling at the board, for whatever reason, when I get on the board, I start spelling things. I spell things wrong all the time. And somebody will be like, Dr. Mallory, that's wrong. I'm like, yeah, it is wrong. Please correct me. When I get things wrong, correct me. I'm going to get things wrong. There's going to be things I don't know. There's going to be things I forget. There's going to be things I'm put incorrectly into Canvas, and so I'm a human being who makes all kinds of mistakes. We all are. And I really try to model that. I just try to model and be very authentically who I am, and let people know that oh no, most of the important jobs I've gotten in my life, I was not the first pick. That's okay. It's fine. My career, my life have worked out great. So yeah, I don't know. Just think about, when you think about the judgment of others that may or may not even be happening, right? Because we get in our heads so much about what may or may not be happening. I don't want to give them my energy. I don't want to give them my power. I just want to have a great little life and be happy and do things that I find interesting and spend time with people that I like.
Yeah. That's a good message, because I feel like sometimes I struggle with that, but then I always just remember why do I actually care about this person? I barely know this person.
Right? Who cares what they think?
Why do I care what you say?
Yeah.
But I guess it's kind of like shifting to a different topic, but I really wanted to ask this. So you've done a lot of lab work just in your PhD, or just a lot of research labs and stuff. But originally you started off with doing more ecological work, going outside and stuff. So how have those experiences differed? And I guess which one do you prefer more?
At my core, I'm always a field biologist. I am happiest. A lot of what I spent time doing in grad school was sitting in the heat, watching a caterpillar. So there's these caterpillars, silver-spotted skippers. We have them here. And they make little houses on their host plant. So they cut it and then they fold it over. And I have spent countless hours just watching caterpillars make houses, and that's something that's not for everybody. When I'm outside, and to me, I'm like, that's so cool, that caterpillar is making a house, and why is it making that house? And thinking about all these questions of like, how did it come to a point that a caterpillar is making a house? And so that's where my heart is always going to be. Kind of given my career where it's taken me, it's really hard to do field work in high school. You don't really have the time. A lot of field work happens in the summer or, fall. We have a little bit of a window, but like the school year doesn't really align with when things outside are doing their thing. And so I've hoped to have research students do field work now and then, but it's really hard to fit into the time frame. And so I think, I really lean into that part of my interest at home. I have a beautiful garden that I love. I spend a lot of time out in my garden. I love seeing what's showing up, what's flowering today, who's visiting my flowers. And so I fill that need in other ways and have grown to appreciate the lab work, because I used to hate like PCR, things in tiny little tubes. I did it post-grad, undergraduate. I had a lab where the woman was showing me how to do PCR. I was like, this is stupid. I'm like, I got this tiny little tube. I got this tiny little thing. There's like some colorless stuff in here. I don't know. Is there a pellet? Is there not a pellet? Oh, I threw the wrong thing away. Now I'm 2 days back. And I ran my gel off backwards and I ran my whole PCR products. Now I've got to go back to step freaking 1, right? And I was just like, this is stupid. I don't like this at all. And then when I came here, because that's something that, I now appreciate how fundamental molecular work and bench work like that can be to any question, right? It can really help you understand the behavioral ecology and the bigger picture questions. It's just a different angle to look at things. And so that's why I really started getting into it, is my students were asking me questions about like, how do I do this? I want to do this molecular project in our bio. And I was like, I don't know. I haven't done any of that. And so I actually asked to teach mold gen with Dr. Monahan, because that's her background. And she helped teach me while I was teaching others. And now I see the fun in it. Now I see the like problem solving kind of puzzle piece of it. So I appreciate it more. I do have a little more fun in that part of the lab, but it's still not, it's still not my favorite thing to have a tiny little tube with some liquid and be like, okay, this didn't work. There's 4 different things that could have gone wrong. And now I have to independently troubleshoot each of those 4 things. And then I could have done it exactly the same one time and another time. And for whatever reason, it works once and not the other time. So that's a level of frustration that I'm not the best at. But I do appreciate it more.
I think, yeah, that makes sense. But whenever I do labs, I think I like enjoying when it works out, but when it doesn't work out, I'm like, oh man. Like, come on.
So often it doesn't work out.
Yeah, that's the worst part, because when it does work out, you're like, yes, I'm amazing. And then when it doesn't, it's just like, gosh darn it. But yes. I've seen like a lot of like recent like biology research go into more like computational bio and like informatics and all that. So like, are you, maybe I don't, like, obviously you're aware of it and like have done probably at least a good amount, but like, are you like passionate? What are your thoughts on that, I guess? And like, I guess, what do you see it kind of like taking more up of the bio research that we're seeing now, or do you think there's still going to be an emphasis on like field biology and lab stuff?
Yeah, again, great question, because you had mentioned how I was just at ISEF, and when I walked around and looked at the projects, machine learning, AI, computational work is in pretty much everything, right? Like every category has some element of it. And I do think there's a little bit of what's kind of hot right now, right? So different ideas become very exciting in the field for a while. And it'll be interesting. Like you can look at publications and say like, these keywords in these publications, and people will do these kind of studies. And you see they're like, okay, in the 90s, everybody was sequencing things. I guess not in the 90s, probably early 2000s, right? Like, oh, now we can sequence things. We're just going to build these big databases, right? What are we going to do with it? I don't know, but we're all doing it. And so I think there's a little bit of like, there are trends that happen. I think it's all a very important additional tool to the toolbox of like, how do we ask questions? How do we think about things in new ways? How do we deal with big data, right? We've spent all this time generating these like mega data sets. How do we approach them? How do we ask questions? Well, we need assistance in like the form of AI, in the form of all these computational kind of models. But fundamentally, I think it always has to go back to the lab and the organism and like to the biology, because something that I learned in the neurobiology lab is you can do everything you want in a little dish, where you're growing cells, and you can get all kinds of information there. And I can even look inside the brain of a moth, which that was the work I was doing. But it doesn't really matter unless it matters to that organism, right? So we were studying development of the olfactory lobe, which is how they smell things. But there's so many ways that nature compensates for like a deficiency in one area, it'll compensate in another way, right? And so unless you're looking at the behavior of that organism, unless you're looking at how something is growing or how something is really developing, who cares? Because it sounds a little cheesy, but like life finds that way, and you can do all the predictive work you want, but until you see it actually happening in real life in a living organism or a living ecosystem, and you can see how these patterns are happening, it's important tools, but you're always going to have to go back to the field. You're always going to have to go back to the lab. An example that comes to mind is I heard a talk by the guy that did the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone National Park, right? And everybody knew these wolves are really important to this ecosystem. And when we took them out, that was a problem. So we're going to reintroduce them, and it's going to have all these great benefits. There were so many unpredicted benefits that nobody had any idea that this would be what would happen. Despite all the data, despite all the models, introducing the wolves changed the feeding behavior of their prey, the deer, which pushed them into the woods more, which meant that the browsing wasn't happening along the riverbanks as much. So there wasn't as much erosion in the riverbanks. And so the rivers actually changed how they flowed. So nobody could have predicted that adding this top predator back to the ecosystem, which actually changed how the water flowed in that ecosystem. And it did, right? So you're always going to have to go back to like the real world and see what's happening.
I guess that is really cool about biology. There's like obviously a lot of data that you can collect, but it's also so unpredictable because there are so many factors because it's like the world around you. So you can't really predict. It's extremely hard to, I guess. Yeah. I also kind of wanted to ask, what are your thoughts? Are you excited about this kind of new type of research, or are you kind of like hesitant, or a mix of both?
Yeah, I think it's not for me personally. I'm glad there's people that are interested in it. I feel like, I guess how I said earlier, like people can put things in front of me and I'll be curious about it and dig into it. And I just don't find myself as curious about that. I don't find myself really wanting to dig into it. I need to understand it. I need to be able to help my students navigate it, use it as a tool. It's not really for me. We'll see. I think I'm in a big wait and see, like what's really going to come of these. I have my hesitation, my concerns about how, like any tool, how is it going to be used? How is it going to be misused? So I'm more just like observing and not engaging beyond what I feel like I am obligated to engage in to be as an educator. But yeah, I'm gardening at home. I'm not playing with AI models.
I think that's like an extremely valid answer. I'm not a huge fan of coding. I feel like it's really cool, but like it's like not my free time. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, like at SSM, we're kind of shifting, well, completely shifting. But I guess like at SSM, you obviously help a lot of research projects through research in biology. So and like you mentioned that a lot of the things you don't have a huge amount of experience, but you like dabble in to guide your students. So how do you kind of like manage what you need to learn to like teach your students and what they kind of have to figure out, and like how do you kind of like balance those two things? Because I feel like there's a lot of things you would need to learn. It's because biology is like so diverse.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of my role as basically the technician, right? So the technician in the lab is a person who makes sure the equipment's working, make sure that supplies are in stock, run some basic experiments, as guided by your mentor, and does some troubleshooting. So like I see myself as I know how to read a protocol. I've read a lot of protocols. I've learned how to interpret protocols. I've learned that protocols aren't perfect and there's going to be gaps in what somebody's supposed to do. And I can use my experience to help my students navigate those protocols. But I always tell them they become the subject matter expert. I trust that they have done the reading and that they understand things. I use my fundamental understanding of the scientific method that then I can ask them questions where I don't know the answer, and I don't know their background research, but I can tell in how somebody explains something, whether or not they get it. And so, like, for example, with this most recent round of proposals, everybody did their defense of their proposals where they present, here's my idea, here's the background. And I could sense, I was like, I don't think they've quite got this yet. I don't know. I haven't read all these papers, but there's just something in the way it's explained that there's some gaps there. And so I told them, okay, you're going to do a whiteboard. You're going to take this whiteboard and you're going to diagram your entire project on this whiteboard. And they did a great job with it. And then afterwards, I had them explain it, and I'd be like, okay, now you've got it. So there's something that in the way somebody can explain something that over the years of just hearing so much science, I can be like, that person understands that, or that's logical. I can see kind of gaps in logical thinking where I don't have to know the specifics of their research. I just know how science works. So they're definitely the experts. The number of times they'll come to me and like, how do I do this? Or what should I do? I'm like, I don't know. I've never done this before. I'm like, I can read the paper with you and we can try to interpret this. But one of the big things of research is you just have to try it. It's never, you can plan everything as much as you want. And when I see students really that kind of leap they have to make is to just do it. I'm like, I don't know. They'll be like, is this going to work? I'm like, I don't know. Just do it. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, we'll think about it and we'll problem shoot it. So yeah, I kind of see myself as this. I know how to science. I know how to do the verb of science, and I don't need to know the minutia of a particular field in order to do science. And my students need to know the minutia of their field.
So it's kind of like being like the general support of like having the really strong background of like what the science should look like, and like being able to identify if there's something that's going wrong or if something that they need help with, and then kind of letting them do their specific stuff on their own, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know how to ask really probing questions that get at whether they understand it or not.
Whenever I do research, I just kind of like, do things. I don't really understand. Like a lot of the times I feel like I'm like untethered, I guess, in a way. Like I don't know where I'm going. I'm just like reading papers and doing stuff. So how would you like recommend, I don't know, just like people like me, or I guess like even professionals, I guess, to like develop their skills so that they know like at least what the science should look like, or what they like the background knowledge that they need?
Oh, I like that term, untethered. Yeah. I think again, part of it is that's part of the process of it. The more you learn, the more you know you don't know anything, which is kind of humbling and also really interesting, right? There's so much to be figured out. And so being comfortable with the untethered piece, being comfortable asking questions and talking to people who have more experience. There's always going to be somebody with more experience. There's people with way more experience than me. And that's also how I approach my teaching is like, I want teacher mentors who have been doing this for 20 years that can give me guidance. And there's always something to learn. And I'm always trying new things. And sometimes in the classroom, just like the lab, it works. And sometimes it doesn't work. And again, you got to back to being comfortable with like, okay, I tried this and it was not good. So what can I do to make it better next time? Yeah, there's a lot of things your teachers, you may think they're all these experts that know all these things, but we're trying things out as well. We're figuring things out. And so part of it is just time. Give yourself time, like just give yourself that grace and know that when you're just starting out, or even when you're mid-career, or even when I'm getting ready to retire, there's going to be so much that I don't know, and that's okay. And working in a certain area, you are going to collect that information. You are going to get that kind of knowledge base. And I'll have people say like, how do you know this? I said, I've been around for a while now, like I've been in a lot of different situations. I am, as you've said, kind of done like a lot of different biology and very broad in my biological knowledge, which is different than many other people. And so I've just collected lots of really random bits of information in the last 20 years that now and then I'm like, oh yeah, I did that once, let's try this. And so, give yourself that time. And there's going to be something, that somebody else doesn't know, right? So there's also going to be that kind of community collaboration piece that works where, you're going to be sitting there, and I'm sure this happens for a lot of students when you're just studying, right? You know something your partner doesn't know, and you get to help them with that. And it's the same thing with anything, right? Like, you're going to feel like, I don't know anything, and I'm just reading all this stuff, and I feel like I'm kind of like, floating around in the dark and just trying something, even though I don't really understand what I'm trying. And that's it. That is the process. That's what it is. And something somebody else doesn't know, and somebody else will help you when you don't know.
So maybe just looking back on your career, was there any moment where you were like, this is, I want to do research. This is what I want to do. And was there a kind of building off of that, was there a moment where you're like, I want to be a teacher specifically. I want to go into teaching rather than industry or stuff like that?
Yeah, I think just my first experience in a lab for something felt really good, even though all I was doing, it was my sophomore, junior year of college. And I literally was making fly media. So it was really disgusting because these flies live off of mushrooms. So I'd take a blender and I'd put mushrooms and like some other powders in there. And then I would blend it up into this like really disgusting brown sludgy stuff, and then like pour that into little tubes. And then I would wash Drosophila vials. And that was literally what I did in my first lab. But something about that environment just felt comfortable to me, right? Like, I liked the people I was around. I liked that I was hearing interesting ideas that I didn't really know what they were talking about, but I could ask questions and I could learn things again, right? And like, I would be on my way to wash dishes, and a graduate student would be there doing an experiment, and I would say, hey, what are you doing there? Can I look at that? And so there was just something about being around those kinds of ideas and around people that are thinking about things that haven't been thought about before that felt good. I just enjoyed it. So I think I've always enjoyed that lab setting. There's something to it that just felt nice. It's a really nice balance between independence. I can just be at my microscope for 8 hours, and I can go and have great conversations with people, and so that felt right. And I think teaching was the same thing. Like, it's something that when, it's a job, and so there's things about my job I don't like. Everything everywhere is politics. There's all kinds of things that are, interpersonal dynamics and policies, and I go to so many meetings, and I'm like, I don't want to go to this meeting. And so I always think about, why am I still in the classroom? What brings me back? And it's because it's fun, like even on the days when I'm having a really crappy day and I'm like, I don't want to go to work today. I feel like crap. I'm just not feeling it. And I know I'm not going to be my best self today. And I can show up in my classroom and I'll be honest. I'll be like, listen, I'm not at my best today, y'all, but we're in this together. Let's do this. And it's enjoyable, talking to a student, learning about their lives, helping them figure out something new. In all the different spaces I've been in, it's that, as much as I think of myself as an introvert, it's that interactions with others that I'm like, this is fun. I like this, I enjoy this. And industry, I would be way too much. I toured a couple of places, and I was like, it's like missing the fun parts to me. And that I get to do, I'm very lucky in where I've taught that I've had a lot of freedom in how I teach, right? So I get to do things how I want to do them, how I think they're interesting, and how I think they're valid learning experiences for my students. And so I think it's just about, it sounds cheesy, but it's like, it's just going to feel right, and there's going to be moments you're going to look around and you're going to be like, something just doesn't feel right. And it might be, like I said, that kind of very early on job. I loved what I was doing, but the work environment was not good. And I said, you know what, I'm going to have to leave this because I got to take care of me, but life will give you other opportunities and things will come along. And, I've left jobs that I've really, really loved for, other life reasons. And it's okay because I enjoy what I do. Like, it just feels good. It just feels good. And I think I'm very lucky that I talked to a lot of my friends whose jobs are, their jobs are jobs, and they pay the bills and they allow them to do the things they want to do in life, which is totally valid. But I've always felt very lucky that I have found something that I truly enjoy, that makes me feel good when I show up and do it.
Yeah. I think being able to just like remove yourself, even if you like what you're doing, just like remove yourself from like just I guess the toxicity of like the community or just the people.
Mhm.
I think that's better off overall because then eventually in the end you'll be like, I'm relieved. I can figure out something else that like you actually enjoy. Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely.
So I guess to kind of end-ish the conversation, if you could like go back in time and give your past self one piece of advice,
Mhm.
what would you give them?
Mhm. Yeah, the like it's gonna be I know a lot of people say, but it's gonna be okay. I put so much pressure on myself. In undergrad, I applied, we call it UBER, undergraduate biology under research. I don't know. I had some acronym that was called UBER. And I knew I liked being in the lab and I applied for it and I totally didn't get it. And I was like, well, that sucks. But I still found a job in a lab and was able to like do what I wanted to do. And so, especially when you're young, especially I think the pressures are so much higher now than when I was going through high school and college. You think you have to have it all figured out. You think like, okay, what I pick as my major is going to be my career. I'm in my 20s and I'm supposed to be getting married and, I'm supposed to be buying a house and which thank goodness people are getting married later now. I mean, whatever, if you fall in love and it works, go with it. But like, I think I made a lot of decisions based on what I thought I was supposed to be doing without really thinking about what do I really want. And I've gotten much better in life at saying like, is this bringing me joy? Is this bringing me satisfaction? If it's something that I'm not enjoying, is it in service of something that I do enjoy? Just like girl, it'll be okay. You got a long life. Life is simultaneously short and very long. You don't have to have it all figured out in your 20s. Nobody really cares what your GPA is. I failed organic chemistry in undergrad because I was in this big room and I was like, well, this is hard and I'm not getting the help I need. So I just stopped going. I failed the class. I said, well, if I ever need this, I can go back and do it again later. Guess what? My life is fine. I have a great life and I failed class. I straight up just took the F. I lost scholarships. There are jobs I really wanted I didn't get. There were, you know, friends that I really miss that aren't in my life anymore. But it's all okay because then other friends come into my life. And like just know that things are silent. And I always think about that, especially things feel so heightened, I think, particularly in high school and in college. Like every decision feels so important, right? Like and that's completely both true. Things are very important. I never want to minimize what somebody's going through. I never want to minimize that, you're feeling stressed or you're upset about this thing or, your high school relationship didn't work out. That's devastating. And also it'll be okay, and just be kind to yourself. We're so mean to ourselves. We're so hard on ourselves. We are the hardest on ourselves more than anybody else. And I got the advice once, I was just being so critical of myself. Somebody said, pretend that a friend is telling you about what they're going through, but what they're going through is what you're going through. What would you tell your friend? And you realize like, oh, I would have nothing but empathy for my friend and I would be there for them. And even if they're not my friend, right, I recognize that there's people that might be behaving in a certain way because they're going through something that I don't understand. So we give so much kindness to others that we don't give to ourselves. So like, yeah, it'll be okay. Be kind to yourself. You're wonderful. You're exactly who you need to be, doing exactly what you need to do in this moment. And it's all good. Yeah.
I think yeah, it's really hard to just remember to like take a deep breath and be like, okay, it's not the end of the world. It's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay if you didn't get this, you'll be fine. I feel like
Mhm.
I think me personally, I get it a lot in my head, just in terms
Mhm.
of like, oh, I need everything to work out. Ah.
Mhm.
And then I'm just like, then sometimes I realize that like, oh, it's really not that deep. Like, it's like
I have had
important, but like, it's not gonna ruin your life or anything.
exactly. I've had so many more rejections than acceptances in my life. And yeah, exactly. It's not that deep. It's fine.
Yeah. Thank you so much for like all the advice and like really, I think insightful, just like inspiration, I guess, from like your experiences and also just being brave enough to choose, be brave enough to choose what you want to do, not just what you're supposed to do. I think that's like a really important thing, especially with like all these, oh, you got to be doing this, you're falling behind.
Yeah,
So I really appreciate all the advice and
of course. Yes, thank you for
yeah.
giving me a space to say it. Yeah, sure.
Okay, of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great summer.
Have a great summer.
Bye.